The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. A young doctor looked at my chart, then back at me, clearly puzzled. Finally, he asked the question I've heard more times than I can count. "You're 108? What's your secret?" Most people expect a complicated answer, some rare medicine, an expensive treatment, or a miracle story. But I simply smiled, because the truth is far simpler than anyone imagines. That morning reminded me of how often we overlook the small choices that quietly shape our lives. When I was young, no one talked about longevity the way people do today. We didn't follow diets or count nutrients. Life was simpler, but it was also harder. Food wasn't about trends. It was about nourishment, survival, and routine. I remember waking up before sunrise, watching the world slowly come alive, and starting the day with habits that seemed ordinary at the time. No one called them healthy. They were just part of daily life. Years passed, and I saw people chase quick fixes, miracle pills, strict plans, promises of instant health. Many tried everything, yet still struggled. Meanwhile, I kept returning to the same simple practices I had followed for decades. That's why the doctor's question made me reflect, not on one dramatic moment, but on thousands of small decisions made consistently over a lifetime. Here's what surprised people most. There was one food I never stopped eating, even when times were difficult. It was simple, affordable, and often overlooked, yet it quietly supported my strength year after year. In fact, there was a time when I almost ignored it completely, and that nearly became a mistake, one that could have changed everything. Because the story of how I discovered its true value begins with a lesson I learned the hard way. When I was young, I didn't think much about what I ate. Like most people, I believed that as long as I felt fine, there was no reason to pay attention. Food was simply fuel, something to get through the day. I still remember an older relative who used to tell me almost every morning, "Never underestimate simple food. It will carry you further than you think." At the time, I nodded politely, but didn't truly listen. Youth has a way of making you feel invincible. There was one particular food they insisted on, humble, inexpensive, and always present at the table. I often skipped it, choosing whatever seemed more satisfying or convenient. It didn't seem important. Years later, life taught me otherwise. After a period of exhaustion and stress, I noticed my energy wasn't what it used to be. Small tasks felt heavier. Recovery took longer. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make me pause and reconsider my habits. That's when those old words came back to me. I decided to return to that simple food, not because of any trend or advice, but because it had quietly supported generations before me. At first, the change felt subtle, but over time, I began to notice something different. Steadier energy, fewer ups and downs, a sense of balance I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a miracle, it was consistency. What surprised me most was how something so ordinary could have such a lasting effect. While others searched for complicated solutions, I realized that many answers had been sitting at the table all along. Looking back, I'm grateful I didn't ignore that lesson forever. Because this small change became the foundation for habits that would shape the decades ahead. But the real test came later, when I watched people around me face challenges I wasn't prepared for, and I began to understand just how powerful simple choices can be. As the years passed, I began to notice something I couldn't ignore. People my age, friends, neighbors, even relatives, started facing health problems one by one. Conversations slowly shifted from plans and dreams to doctor visits and medications. It was a quiet change, but a noticeable one. At first I assumed it was simply part of getting older. After all, time affects everyone differently. But I couldn't help wondering why some seemed to struggle more than others. I remember sitting with an old friend who sighed and said, "I wish I had paid more attention when I was younger." There was a heaviness in those words, not just about health, but about missed opportunities to care for oneself. Moments like that made me reflect on my own habits. While I was never perfect, I had stayed consistent with the simple foods and routines I learned early in life. Nothing extreme, nothing complicated, just small choices repeated day after day. And slowly, I began to see how those choices added up. There were times when illness passed through communities, and I watched as people dealt with long recoveries or lingering fatigue. It made me realize that health isn't built overnight. It's shaped quietly over years. What surprised me most was how often people searched for quick solutions once problems appeared, forgetting that prevention is usually simpler than repair. I don't say this with pride, but with gratitude. I felt a steady strength that allowed me to keep moving, keep enjoying life, and remain independent while others struggled. That realization deepened my appreciation for the basics: nourishing food, moderation, and patience. It also taught me a powerful truth. The habits you repeat today become the condition you live with tomorrow. And as time went on, there was one daily ritual I refused to skip. Something so simple, yet so important that I still follow it even now. Even now, at 108, my mornings begin the same way they have for decades. Slowly, quietly, and with intention. People often imagine that reaching this age must involve strict rules or complicated routines, but the truth is far simpler. There is one food I have never abandoned, no matter how busy life became or how circumstances changed. It became my anchor, something steady in a world that constantly shifts. I remember times when life felt uncertain, when schedules were unpredictable, and challenges appeared without warning. Yet this small ritual remained unchanged. Preparing it each day felt almost like a promise to myself, a reminder to care for the body that carried me through every season of life. Over the years, I noticed how this habit influenced more than just physical strength. It created a sense of rhythm and discipline. Starting the day with something nourishing set the tone for everything that followed. My energy, my focus, even my mood. What's remarkable is that it never felt like a sacrifice. There was comfort in its simplicity. While others chased new trends or constantly changed their routines, I stayed with what I knew worked. Sometimes people ask if I ever grew tired of it. The answer is no, because I learned to appreciate its role, not just its taste. It became part of my story, a quiet companion through decades of change. Looking back, I believe this consistency mattered more than perfection. It wasn't about doing everything right. It was about doing something good, repeatedly. And perhaps that's the lesson many overlook. Longevity isn't built on occasional effort, but on daily care. But as important as this food has been, I eventually realized something even deeper. Because reaching a long life isn't only about what you eat, it's also about how you think, how you feel, and the way you choose to live each day. That realization brings us to the final piece of the story, the truth that ties everything together. After more than a century of living, people often assume the secret must be hidden in what I ate, the right ingredients, the right portions, the right routine. And while food certainly played a role, I eventually understood something far more important. Longevity isn't just about nourishing the body, it's about nourishing the mind and spirit too. Over the years, I've seen people who followed perfect diets, yet carried constant stress, resentment, or worry. And I've seen others with simple habits who lived with calm, gratitude, and purpose. The difference wasn't always physical, it was emotional. I learned that how you think shapes how you live. There were moments in my life filled with hardship, times of uncertainty, loss, and change. What carried me through wasn't just what was on my plate, but the ability to adapt, to stay hopeful, and to find meaning even in difficult seasons. One of the greatest lessons I discovered is the power of perspective. Instead of focusing on what was missing, I tried to appreciate what was present. A new day, a conversation, the chance to keep moving forward. Gratitude became a quiet habit, one that brought peace, regardless of circumstances. I also learned not to hold on to bitterness. Letting go of anger and forgiving, both others and myself, lifted a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. Emotional lightness, I believe, contributes to physical well-being more than we often admit. And perhaps most importantly, I stayed curious about life. No matter my age, I found joy in learning, listening, and staying connected to the world around me. So if you ask me what truly kept me going all these years, I would say this: eat simply, live gently, and keep your heart open. Because in the end, a long life isn't measured only by years, it's measured by the peace you feel within them. And that is the real secret I would pass on to anyone willing to listen.